Okay, let's jump right in. Picture this scene, because it is straight out of a nightmare. It's the incredibly dark, turbulent night of December 27, 1948. A massive Douglas DC-3 passenger plane, flight NC-16002, is cruising at 8,300 feet. Out of nowhere, radar contact weakens. The captain radios in a minor technical issue, and literally within 10 seconds, the plane, along with its 134 passengers and crew, just vanishes into the notorious Bermuda Triangle. They are swallowed whole by an unimaginably violent storm. All the electronic equipment completely dies, leaving the plane entirely at the mercy of the tempest. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack one of the most unbelievable survival stories in all of human history.
Now, I want to be clear from the start. This isn't just your typical, tragic campfire story about a plane crash. Not at all. We're actually going to look at this as an intense psychological case study of extreme mental resilience over 9 harrowing years. Because you have to wonder, how do you survive on an uncharted island for almost a decade when the entire world is convinced you're dead? What psychological tools keep the human mind from just completely snapping when you've been erased from the map? Let's find out.
Section 1. The crash and immediate shock, from chaos to clarity.
So, let's look at how this whole nightmare started. The plane bursts out of the storm, engines totally dead, plummeting right toward an uncharted island. But in this miraculous 1-in-a-million stroke of luck, this giant ancient tree literally catches the fuselage like a net. It keeps the plane from shattering on impact, saving all 134 lives on board. But surviving the crash? That was just day one. Panic could have easily ripped them apart right then and there. But Captain Robert Miller and a retired Army doctor named Evelyn Reed instantly stepped up. First, Dr. Reed jumped right into medical triage for the 10 severely injured passengers. Second, Captain Miller immediately set up a strict division of labor. He knew that terrified, idle minds would quickly descend into total madness. So third step, he organized teams to scavenge the wreck and build temporary shelters out of plane seats, metal sheets, and huge leaves. This wasn't just about blocking the rain, it was a critical psychological shield against despair. But resilience is rarely a straight line. By day 10, they hit their first major psychological fracture. The radio batteries had died, no rescue planes were anywhere in the sky, and the mental toll just became too much for some. 5 young people, 4 boys and a girl, completely broke under the pressure. In the dead of night, they stole a makeshift raft crafted from wreckage and vanished into the ocean. They were never seen again. This was a devastating blow, and it forced the remaining group to confront a truly terrifying reality.
Which brings us to Section 2, Establishing Order for Survival, the Architecture of Hope.
The sudden departure of those 5 youths was a massive wake-up call for everyone else. They suddenly realized, okay, rescue isn't coming today, and it might not come tomorrow either. To stop the group from mentally unraveling any further, they had to shift their mindset from waiting to be saved to simply living. They basically had to weaponize routine and structure to protect their sanity. Because, at the end of the day, survival requires a system. So Captain Miller engineered a highly structured micro-society. He assigned specific specialized teams. One team focused entirely on foraging for fruit and food. Another was dedicated to shelter reinforcement, while a third, led by Dr. Reed, handled medical care. This brilliant system meant every single survivor, no matter how traumatized, had a reason to wake up. They had a role, they had purpose.
And this is where we see how crucial early victories are for mental health. Take a look at these milestones. A teenager figures out how to focus sunlight through his glasses to start their very first fire. Suddenly, they have warmth, cooked food, and protection from whatever is lurking in the dark. Then, a survivor with actual hunting experience teaches the group to fashion spears from plain metal, which leads to them taking down their first wild boar. They even managed to drag huge tree trunks onto the beach to spell out the word help. Now, these weren't just practical, day-to-day wins. They were massive psychological anchors that kept them tethered to hope.
Moving into Section 3, Forging a Resilient Community, Finding Light in the Darkness. By the time they hit the 6-month mark, a very dark reality was unfolding back home. The U.S. government officially called off the $45 million search operation. As far as the world was concerned, they were dead. On the island, the reality was grim too. They lost a man early on to a toxic piece of fruit, and others slowly succumbed to injuries or just sheer heartbreak. But here is the key to their resilience. Rather than letting morale totally collapse, they actively managed their trauma. On one hand, they coped with grief by holding dignified burials for the dead. On the other hand, they deliberately cultivated their humanity. They gathered around the campfire at night, singing songs and sharing stories from their past lives. These rituals were absolutely crucial for protecting their collective mental health.
Let's look at the timeline here. 6 months in, abandoned by the world. But then, at the 1.5-year mark, something incredible happens. The very first baby is born on the island. For a group of people who felt entirely forgotten, this tiny new life brought an unbelievable surge of hope right when they needed it most. By year 2, they'd actually mastered basic agriculture and fishing. But of course, the desperate pull of home never really goes away, which leads us to the 2-plus-year mark and what they called the Great Escape Tragedy.
Section 4. Navigating Despair and Division. The Fracture of Sanity.
So, the group's engineer, a man named Arthur Vance, had meticulously directed the construction of a heavy, sturdy boat made out of plane wreckage and timber. 25 of their strongest members bravely set sail to find help. But the Bermuda Triangle wasn't done with them. A sudden, violent storm capsized the vessel. A few miraculously swam back to shore, but 16 of their very best people drowned. This data really shows the stark reality by the 5-year mark. 15 had died from illness or pure despair. 5 were missing from that early raft escape, and now 16 dead from the boat crash. Out of the 134 people who boarded that flight, only 98 were left. This specific tragedy was a crushing blow that pushed the remaining survivors to their absolute psychological limits.
Between the severe trauma and their food sources starting to dwindle, the group's unity finally cracked. They essentially split into 2 opposing psychological camps. On one side, you had Captain Miller's faction. They absolutely refused to give up, believing they had to hold on to hope and plan another escape, no matter the cost. On the flip side, you had the defeatist faction. Led by people who were just completely broken by the constant loss, they believed that fighting back only brought more death. They just wanted to accept their fate and try to live out their days on the island.
And as if the internal tension wasn't bad enough, an exploration party foraging deep in the island's interior stumbled onto something horrific. They found ruins from some unknown ancient civilization, and right there, inside a crumbling cave, was a human skeleton lying next to a rusted metal plane part. I mean, wow. It was terrifying, undeniable proof that they were not the first to be trapped there. The dread that this island was genuinely cursed, that they were stuck in a permanent graveyard, spiked their anxiety to just unbearable levels.
Which brings us to Section 5, the final test and rescue, the last spark. Things kept getting worse. By year 7, disease and starvation claimed 16 more lives. Then we hit year 8. A catastrophic cyclone violently obliterates almost everything they had built. And if that wasn't enough, it was immediately followed by a massive earthquake that uprooted trees and triggered landslides. When the earth finally stopped shaking, there were just 82 people left. 82 exhausted, starving souls sitting completely exposed in the freezing rain. All their infrastructure, their agriculture, their shelters, gone. After 8 years, their mental resilience was finally completely shattered. They were absolutely convinced this was the end.
But, incredibly, that devastating earthquake actually did something else. The violent shifting of the Earth moved the massive wreckage of the original plane just enough to expose some deeply buried wires in the old radio equipment. A few days later, Arthur Vance, the engineer, is inspecting this shifted wreckage, and, by sheer cosmic coincidence, a rare, intense solar flare hits the Earth's magnetic field at that exact time. Arthur patches together some frayed battery wires, flips a switch, and miraculously, a green light flickers on. With shaking hands, he sends out a transmission they thought they'd never make. Mayday, we are alive. We have been stuck on an island for 9 years.
What happened next is basically out of a movie. A stunned operator at Miami Air Traffic Control actually catches the crackling message. When Arthur repeats the plane's old registration in Captain Miller's name, the entire control room goes dead silent. The U.S. Navy instantly relaunches a massive search grid. Back on the island, those 82 exhausted survivors find a final reserve of energy, working day and night to keep massive signal fires roaring on the beach. And then, they see it. After 9 grueling years of hell, a U.S. Navy ship breaches the horizon. The screaming, the crying, the overwhelming relief. They had actually done it.
This absolutely incredible testament to human endurance, the power of order, and the raw will to live was immortalized exactly a year later. In 1958, the renowned author James Baldwin documented their brilliant survival strategies and the deep psychological battles they fought in his best-selling book, Lost in the Echo. It forever preserved their legacy, proving to the world that even in the absolute darkest, most forgotten corners of the earth, human resilience can still win.
So, what is the ultimate takeaway from this explainer? It's that survival is every bit as much a mental game as it is a physical one. Those 82 remaining survivors of Flight NC-1602 didn't just survive a hostile island. They survived overwhelming despair, profound grief, and the total erasure of their existence from the outside world. And it leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about. When you are faced with your own darkest storms, when absolutely everything seems lost, will you lose hope, or will you figure out a way to keep the fire burning? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today. See you next time.